Everyone, this is Denise at Something Beautiful Handcrafts, and it looks like I'm live and trying to adjust the camera. Okay, there we go. All right, now, today I want to talk a little bit about Rust Belt Fibershed and about Suri Alpaca. And hopefully this will go smoothly. I'm so used to editing videos and not going live. Oh, it's M. I should have M come and talk a little bit about praxis. Hey, M. Let's see if we can get her to come in here. Okay. In the meantime, let me tell you what you're seeing here. Right. Oh, hang on. We got a dog situation. Would you stop? Everybody, this is Jewel. Oh, of course, she doesn't want to get in the picture. And if you've seen some of my earlier videos about fiber, you know that Jewel is the little terrier mix I picked up a couple of years ago. Em is here. I'm doing a live on Rust Belt Fibershed. So I suppose you want to kind of just stick your face in real quick and talk about praxis. Okay, let me turn it towards you because it'll be facing out that way.
Oh.
Tell everybody who you are, what you do at Praxis, and a little bit about Praxis.
Everybody. I'm Em from Praxis. I'm the program manager. Who is this again?
Oh, this is from my YouTube channel.
Oh, YouTube channel. Hello,
Yes.
YouTube.
And I'm just doing a little thing on the Rust Belt Fibershed,
Oh,
the
beautiful.
1 year, one outfit that we're doing here at
Yeah.
Praxis, and a little bit about the difference between Huacuya, why I cannot remember how to say it. It's been so long. And Suri Alpaca. I usually know what we usually just say alpaca, and then there's Suri. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, you're the expert on all that.
I like to think so.
Yeah, definitely.
I like to think I can make it work.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, now Rust Belt Fibershed basically is an organization that is within the what's called the Rust Belt area, and that's portions of Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And it's the Lake Erie watershed and a bit of the Mississippi watershed. And it's known as the Rust Belt because that used to be where a lot of the steel mill and those type of productions happened. And that, as we know, a lot of that economy has dried up over the years. So that's how you get the Rust Belt. And the mission for the Rust Belt Fibershed is to bring together a collaboration of growers, and generally when we refer to growers, we're talking about people who raise animals for fiber artists, fiber mills, and that whole system there in order to work with local and sustainable fibers to produce local and sustainable textiles. And so Rust Belt Fibershed has a program for Rust Belt alpacas, and it is to put together a consortium of alpaca growers in order to help them basically networking, finding people who are interested in their products, and also distributing those products and goods across the region and other places. So, I mean, it's really important that if you're a person who is working with fiber animals, especially if you are beginning or you feel like you're all alone, and sometimes you do, sometimes you may be the only person in a certain part of the region that has alpacas or some type of fiber animal. So you want to be connected to other people who are also raising those animals, so you can learn about, how to manage the animal's livestock care. You may want to learn about how to manage the fiber, how to market the fiber to perhaps hand spinners, to mills, to people who are interested in the yarn, or even as a cooperative for larger mills or things like that. Or you may just want to keep it local, so you need to build a local network in order to get your alpaca fleece out into the market. So at any rate, 1 year, one outfit is a collaboration with people who are in the fiber shed who want to produce an entire outfit for the, well, it's basically a year, and it needs to be sustainable and local within that region. All right, let me get Joel off my lap. Go on, you. She doesn't want to get off the lap. At any rate, last year I participated in the 1 year 1 outfit, basically as an advisor to anyone who needed help with the sourcing, spinning, knitting, or weaving of the fibers that they had. This year I'm actually going to produce an item with the help of the Praxis team. So there are about 6 or 7 of us, and I'm doing the spinning. Now, at Praxis, we have a lot of alpaca for the spinning, and this was alpaca from one of the members. The member does live in the Rust Belt because that's one of the stipulations of the Rust Belt Fibershed. And this is all going to be processed within that Fibershed. Basically, we are doing the processing. That, of course, is not a stipulation for the 1 year 1 outfit, as long as you source your material, whether it be the raw wool or the yarn or even the actual fabric itself, just needs to be locally produced here. It's a little harder to find locally produced fabric here in the Rust Belt Fibershed. So most of the people are either starting with raw fibers or they're starting with yarn that is grown and milled here and then creating their fabric from there. Now, these are alpaca. All of this is alpaca. I'm going to try it again. I think it's Huacuya. At some point, I will get that. You know what? That reminds me of the Leicester long wool. It took me forever to get Leicester correct. And this is Suri Alpaca. I bet there's quite a few people who didn't know that there were actually 2 types of alpaca. Now, we're used to seeing the big fluffy alpacas all the time. When you think of alpaca, that's pretty much what you think of. And maybe not so much of the Suri. Suri is, well, I've been told it's rare. That's kind of hard for me to believe because I seem to know like a lot of people who raise Suris, but then again, I know a lot of people who raise fiber animals, and that's not necessarily a widespread thing either. So I just seem to be in the know. And the main difference between the alpaca and the Suri alpaca is the texture of the fiber. In general, Suri does tend to grow longer, and the length that you'll see when you buy Suri really depends on when this Suri is being shorn. Sometimes you can get Suri, 3 or 4 inches. Sometimes you get Suri at 5, 6, or 7 inches, depending on the actual grower. The average length that I generally get is about 5 inches. I've been sent really long Suri, which is really cool. Usually the staple length for alpaca is about 3 to 4 inches. I've gotten it just a little bit longer, but about 3 to 4 inches. Look a little closer at the structure. As you can see, alpaca is crimpy. I don't know if I can get a really good view there, because a lot of times, I know this is like me on the mission again. People say alpaca has no crimp, so it has no memory. There's clearly crimp here, and usually the finer the micron count is, the crimpier the alpaca is. So yes, it has crimp. Suri, however, has absolutely no crimp, none whatsoever. So you can get a really good view. I don't know, this camera does not have any love for me today. So it has absolutely no crimp. It's very smooth. It feels very soft, but feeling soft and having a low micron count are not necessarily the same things. And it's a lot like mohair. I like to think about it like mohair. Of course, alpacas do not have lanolin, but they tend to be very, very dusty. Since Suri is so smooth, it's one of those fibers that, for me, I have a low tolerance for short fibers. I will tend to spin alpaca shorter. Let me get a comparison here. Okay, so you can see the comparison at the cut ends and the difference of the length. I tend to spin alpaca shorter than I would spin Suri alpaca. Let's see if I get a, when I pulled this from the bag, I actually chose some really nice long locks. It's a pretty decent length. But I would say, if you look at the difference, I would spin this, but if this Suri was as short as this, I would pretty much discard it as being a second for felting. I'm just not a fan of smooth, short fibers. I also find, too, that when you have a lot smooth, short fibers, that they tend to stick out, and it increases the prickle factor. So, and that's one of the reasons that people have a hard time with a lot of commercial Angora items, because they tend to be shorn short, because you can get more money if you're, instead of growing it out to 3, 4, 5 inches. If you're growing out 2 inches, then technically you get more harvest, and you can get more money, but you also have shorter fibers, and they tend to shed out, and their cut ends tend to kind of expose themselves and cause more prickle. So that's just my deal with short fibers. Again, now, how do I process the Suri? I process the Suri the same way I process everything else, actually. It is best practice to wash alpaca before you spin it, okay? I mean, it's best practice to wash most things before you spin it. And I am a big fan of spinning in the grease, but not in the dirt. So there are a few fleeces that I would spin without washing, but most of them get a cold rinse. And the same goes for alpaca. I have seen some alpaca that is just so lovely that I have spun it without washing it. And generally, because the grower has blown that coat out prior to shearing it, and that does happen, especially when you get growers who are show growers. They tend to blow those coats out really nicely prior to. The big issue with the alpaca, for those who are tempted to use it before you wash, is that it is loaded with dirt. I mean, that is filthy. And as you begin to card it, basically, or however it is you're going to process it, or even sometimes you just spin it from the locks. Though I find that with Suri, because of the way that it's mats close to the skin, because of the dirt, it's not always easy. But you can pretty much tap this carder and see the little piles of dirt down here. And that actually tends to make me itch. So I usually have to do some form of processing to alpaca before I personally can use it. I also find that when you're talking about Suri, because it is so smooth and it is so soft, a lot of the second cuts, if you have someone who's shearing and making second passes, which happens if you're making second passes, of course, the little teeny second passes, they kind of get caught in the tips here. And when you're spinning, they're like little daggers that poke at your skin. So my preference is to at least flick in order to remove that dirt and to remove the little second cuts if there happen to be any, or any of the little matted ends. I don't generally run Suri through my drum carder, and that is because it is long, and I just find that it tangles, so it's not really drum carder for me. I could cut it. I'd rather not cut it. Okay, so basically, I usually just flick my ends like that and pull it off. And that's normally enough for me to work with it. Occasionally, depending on how it was sheared, when it was sheared, how long it's been stored, how it was stored, you do have some tips that are caught on both ends. And in that case, I would flick one end and then flick the other end. Of course, the longer the Suri is, the deeper you need to go into it in order to kind of tease it apart. That makes it much easier to spin. Just remember that whatever work you put into the Suri, the more work you put into it, the easier this is going to be to spin. And that pretty much goes for any fibers. Maybe with the exception of like Angora or something like that. If you have a really good alpaca fleece that's kind of like this, you can almost spin it just like this. It's really nice here. But for the most part, if you want to spin a smooth fiber and you want to spin a fine fiber, you're going to have to break up those locks in some way or another, and that definitely applies to Suri. So now, here we go. We have this Suri here, and we have this one here. Okay. Very smooth fiber, cut ends. How do I resolve those cut ends? Normally, I spin from the fold, especially if the fiber is as long as this. Okay. Of course, any alpaca you get is going to have cut ends because alpacas don't rue. At least I've never heard of one that does. But when you have a crimpy fiber, the ends that are cut aren't really as blunt as this really straight, smooth fiber. So these ends will fold in pretty well. You won't really have a problem. But these nice, smooth, blunt ends are going to stick out. Of course, it's going to give you that marvelous halo, but it also might evoke a prickle factor. So let's just go ahead and fold those guys in by spinning from the fold, basically. And you can see how nice and thin that comes off here. To be a nice, delicate, fine fiber. Oh, one thing I want to point out that I kind of forgot to talk about is the difference in weight between I'm going to try to say it again, Huacuya, did I say that right? And the Suri Alpaca. Okay, so Suri Alpaca is a denser fiber, okay? This is light and fluffy and crimpy. This is denser and smoother. So the weights are going to be different. What would be an ounce in this alpaca would be significantly smaller in this one because this is going to weigh more. So you want to keep that in mind when you are making yarn, okay? I won't really recommend Suri Alpaca for a bulky yarn. It's going to be a very heavy garment. So keep that in mind. It'll be very heavy, which is one of the reasons I do prefer to spin it thin, just for that purpose. And you know what? For the most part, I find that alpaca is heavier than some of the other wools anyway, by weight. So that's just a thing to keep in mind. All right, now I've got this nice and flicked out. It's nice and smooth. And this particular alpaca, well, actually all of it here, we're weaving for fabric for this particular. But the Suri in general is best for weaving, and the Huacuya is best for knitting. And that's basically because of the lack of crimp and the drape. A nice good alpaca will have a nice good decent crimp, and for knitting it'll give you a little elasticity in the garment. Suri, for real, has no crimp at all, and you won't get any elasticity in the garment, and you'll just get really good drape. So good for weaving, not really good for knitting, though I do have friends who have crocheted with Suri. It really depends on what you're making and the look that you want. But this will all be for weaving. Suri does not take up color as well as some of the wools. And basically this is the same for any of these smooth fibers like this. They all are going to take up dye differently from fiber to fiber. The alpaca takes up dye nicely. Depending on the color of the alpaca, you get kind of a muted tone. Some take up dye really well, and you get some really nice, brilliant colors. Okay, this white will take up dye really nicely. On the other hand, because of the structure of the Suri, it won't take up dye as easily. So keep that in mind too. You might need to leave this guy in the dye pot a little longer. You might need a little extra something to get a really good dye. You know what? And I can't really say I've had much problem because I tend to crock pot things. When they're in a crock pot, I'm really generous with whatever my fixative is, whether it's citric acid or whether it is vinegar. And I leave things in the pot for a long time, a lot of times by accident. I'm so sorry, but I do. So in general, I tend to get a pretty decent dye from the Suri. It does not look the same, but it's still a pretty decent dye. Okay, that's it for now. I just wanted to kind of introduce the Suri. I don't think I've made a video on Suri before, so I kind of need to take you all through the process of it and maybe demystify it. It's a wonderful fiber if you can find it to work with. With any fibers, find somebody who is growing with the intention of hand spinning. I got a box of Suri Alpaca a couple years ago from a new grower, and they sent me a box of like really short, harsh. It felt like it was like neck and leg. And so if that is your first experience with Suri Alpaca or pretty much any fiber, you're not really gonna like the fiber. And so you might form in your mind a bad idea about Suri, and it's not actually true. So before you buy anything, please make sure you find a grower who is a hand knitter or a spinner or a weaver if possible, so they'll understand the fiber that you want for your personal use. Okay, so how long does it take to make material usable for knitting? A lot of that depends on the speed of the spinner. When I was production spinning, I was spinning about a pound of fiber per day, and that was in between all of the other things I was doing in life. I probably could have gone faster if I had just been soul spinning. So if you're talking about if you're talking about a worsted weight, you get about 500 yards a pound for most wools. So that was almost 2,000 yards of fiber, of yarn per day. That's a lot. And with 2,000 yards, I could weave, a large shawl. That's about the size of one of my large shawls. So spinning 4 ounces, I can easily spin 4 ounces. in a day. And that's a hat. If I spend 8 ounces, that's a really nice scarf or a hat and a pair of mittens. So depending on the speed that you spin at, a couple days, and you'll have something that you can use to knit if you're making a small item. Suri is really wonderful. I think of Suri the way I think of silk, basically. I don't know if it has the tensile strength that silk does. I don't think anything has a tensile strength that silk does, but I just kind of think about it as silk. And don't let the naysayers about the strength of alpaca fool you. Remember that alpaca is a very old fiber, and it's been used in South America for centuries, and they use it to make rugs, they use it to make blankets, it's used to make saddle pads for animals. So if you get the right grade of the alpaca that you want, you can use that alpaca however you need to use it. Of course, you're not getting a super fine fiber to make a rug out of, or a super fine fiber to make a saddle blanket out of, but you can get some coarser grades and have them used for that purpose, or you can get a really fine grade and it can be next to the skin. Alrighty, I'm going to stop here. I feel like I'm kind of babbling on, but this video will be up, and I will try to get back to this by the end of the week. I do have some Suri already on the ladybug wheel, which I didn't bring with me, and so I'll have maybe a bobbin or two, maybe even some completed, so I can show you what the final product looks like. It is absolutely gorgeous. All right, thank you for watching. Have a great day.